Hello and welcome back to another read-through of the StanRichson Document. Today we're going to be reading through the Experience in the Moment section. So just to give a background, the whole goal for part one, to figure out what to do, we must first consider how we understand the world and our capacity to deliberately act at all. What we just read, the collective knowledge of the world, had us going from outer to inner. We began by exploring our collective external knowledge of the world, but found it couldn't fully explain our internal subjective lives. So the necessary pivot points us inward, forcing us to investigate the very lens through which we experience everything, our own consciousness. So now that we recognize that so much of what we experience and understand has to do with our subjective lens, now let's actually look into that and explore experience. Here we are, experience in the moment, and that is what we're going to be reading through. A quick heads up, this section eventually dives into some complex yet crucial science. We'll be connecting the dots from brain cells to the big picture of your conscious experience. Why it's crucial? This is the foundation for how we experience and understand the world. If you can grasp how your brain builds your experience of meaning, you can gain a powerful new perspective on how to consciously and deliberately shape your own life. So that's basically the premise here, and this is the payoff of the collective knowledge of the world. We pointed out that we can gain a lot from both introspection and empirical science, and this section that we're going to be reading today does it all. So, live reading, experience in the moment. As we continue, we move from the collective knowledge of the external world to the personal and subjective dimension of experience. Science and philosophy have evolved as systematic methods for understanding reality, yet their development has always been fueled by the filter of conscious awareness. The contents of both, whether empirical objects studied by science or abstract concepts explored by metaphysics, are grounded in this filter, as all discoveries and insights emerge from the interplay between external reality and the subjective lens of human experience. By examining this subjective experience, where thoughts, emotions, and perceptions unfold, we can better understand meaning, purpose, and the nature of existence. Okay, so we start off with intuitions about our experience. As we turn our focus from the external world to our own subjective experience, our first step is to explore our most fundamental intuitions about that experience. Before we can apply complex scientific or philosophical models, we must first examine the phenomena of our inner world as they appear to us directly. Consciousness. Consciousness is the foundation of subjective experience, shaping how we perceive and interact with the world around us. It is not a passive or transparent window, but an active, dynamic process deeply intertwined with the brain's workings. Rather than presenting an unmediated view of the world, consciousness constructs and shapes our perceptions, influenced both by external stimuli and our internal states. For instance, when we look at a chair, our brain interprets patterns of photons, translating shape, outline, color, and texture into the experience of seeing a chair. This process draws on past knowledge, context, and expectations, making the objects of our consciousness filtered interpretations rather than direct components of the physical world. Sensory data, memory, and learned associations combine to create a subjective reality that reflects our individual experiences. We can understand consciousness as operating across different levels of awareness, shaping how we perceive and interact with the world. At any moment, our conscious mind encompasses the thoughts, perceptions, and sensations that are immediately accessible to us, while the subconscious mind, though outside our direct awareness, continuously influences our behavior and emotional responses. These levels of consciousness interact dynamically, shaping the full spectrum of our experience. Automatic, unconscious awareness allows us to perform habitual tasks, such as walking or driving a familiar route, without deliberate attention. Here, the brain operates on autopilot, efficiently relying on subconscious processes to guide actions. Conversely, reflection, in other words, focused awareness, involves directing thoughts and analyzing actions, such as solving a problem or contemplating a decision. Self-consciousness. A defining feature of human consciousness is its self-consciousness, its ability to reflect upon itself. This capacity allows us not only to be aware of the world, but also to observe our own awareness, turning inward to examine the nature of our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. By making consciousness both the subject and object of inquiry, we can unravel the complexities of subjective experience and better understand how our inner experiences shape our reality. This reflective capacity provides a bridge between subjective awareness and shared understanding, forming the foundation of a metaphysical framework that integrates personal intuition with shared understanding. By exploring how subjective awareness informs our interaction with the external world, we gain tools to navigate the dynamic interplay between lived experience and collective knowledge. To engage more deeply with these inner processes, we can leverage the practice of mindfulness, the deliberate act of focusing on and observing thoughts, emotions, and perceptions as they arise. Mindfulness allows us to explore the unfolding of mental processes in a non-judgmental and intentional manner, contrasting with the automatic, everyday awareness that often guides us. Through mindfulness, we can gain insight into the intricate relationship between inner experiences and the external world. As we progress, we will incorporate mindfulness exercises to deepen our exploration of conscious experience. These practices will ground our broader inquiry in lived intuition, ensuring that our framework reflects the richness of subjective experience. So we don't go real deep into this, and I'll just kind of read through it. Let's begin with a simple mindful meditation. If you're new to mindfulness, there are many helpful resources, such as the Waking Up app by Sam Harris, which offer guided meditations as an introduction. So we don't actually have to do this right now, but just reading through an example of one of these meditations. Find a quiet space and sit comfortably. Close your eyes and direct your attention to your breathing. Pay attention to the sensations of air entering and leaving your nostrils, the rise and fall of your chest, and the sound of each breath. As you maintain this focus, pay attention to what happens in your mind. Inevitably, you will notice various thoughts and emotions. These appear involuntarily. You don't summon them, they simply come into awareness. We can think about this phenomenon as thoughts arising, similar to how we often use related expressions like caught up in thought in our everyday lives. Some thoughts vanish as quickly as they appear. For example, notice how when your attention shifts from focusing on your breath to a thought about your day, the sensation of your breath gradually recedes into the background. Where do these thoughts go? Do we consciously decide to shift focus, or does it happen automatically? As we observe thoughts appearing and disappearing, we can imagine them moving in and out of a mental space, what we could call a space of consciousness. In this space, thoughts and emotions arise, exist momentarily, and then fade away. Yet even as these mental objects come and go, consciousness itself remains elusive. Unlike physical objects, which can be clearly defined or located, consciousness appears more like a background or a foundation, a persistent yet intangible context within which all thoughts emerge. As we observe the spontaneous arising of thoughts and emotions within consciousness, deeper questions emerge. Why do certain experiences arise while others fade? What do these phenomena reveal about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to reality? These questions lead us to Phenomenology, a branch of philosophy that seeks to develop frameworks for understanding the experience of consciousness in ways that align with our intuitions. The term phenomenon comes from the Greek verb meaning to show itself. Through phenomenology, we can explore how subjective experiences, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions manifest within consciousness. These mental phenomena share a striking quality. They arise and fade involuntarily, showing themselves without any deliberate effort on our part. Whether it's a fleeting thought, a sudden emotion, or a physical sensation, these experiences appear seemingly of their own accord, shaped by processes beyond our full comprehension. It is as though these phenomena happen to us, rather than being fully under our control. This lack of agency mirrors a principle observed in the physical world. Just as external objects follow deterministic laws, mental phenomena seem to follow patterns that elude our direct influence. This observation raises a profound question about free will. If thoughts, emotions, and perceptions arise involuntarily, what does this tell us about the nature of our conscious experience? We notice that much of what appears in consciousness seems to happen to us rather than being fully under our control. This realization challenges the assumption that we are the authors of our thoughts and feelings, prompting us to reflect on how we understand these experiences. All right, so now we make the transition into bridging that discussion into a discussion about our broader understanding and knowledge. So meaning as our primary focus. Our exploration has led us to a fundamental problem of knowledge, that is, a problem of epistemology. Part 1 of this framework is tasked with answering the question, what can we know about the world and our place in it? We can begin to answer this question by acknowledging a simple mindful observation. All knowledge, everything we perceive, feel, and understand, arises through the medium of consciousness. Crucially, while consciousness itself may feel like a flood of raw information, anything we can consciously notice anything that becomes a distinct perception or thought, is not random noise. It is intelligible. When we see a chair, we don't merely perceive a shape or function, we encounter what it means. We recognize it as a chair, something to sit on, or perhaps even something associated with a particular memory or space. This meaning is not primarily a quality of the physical matter itself, but is something that arises within the conscious experience of perceiving it. If consciousness is our only access to knowledge, and if the nature of our conscious attention is inherently meaningful, then a promising epistemological path emerges. To investigate the world, we can first investigate the nature of our experience of meaning itself. This shift in focus leads us from a general question about knowledge to a more precise one about our experience. Instead of asking what something means, we can ask, what is it like for something to be experienced as meaningful? We are not only concerned with what a chair is, but with how we meaningfully experience it as a chair. The experience of meaning. Just as we use mindfulness to develop an intuition about the nature of consciousness, we can apply the same approach to explore our experience of meaning. By observing how meaning arises, resonates, transforms, and fades in moment-to-moment experience, we can develop a more nuanced, dynamic understanding of meaning, one that does not reduce it to a fixed or external property. In doing so, we aim to contribute to our more comprehensive metaphysical understanding of the world, one that fully embraces our subjective experience as an integral part of reality. When we pause to reflect on our experience, we notice that meaning is not something we construct after the fact. It is already there, shaping how the world appears to us. We do not first encounter meaningless objects and then assign meaning to them. Instead, the world arrives already intelligible and significant, filled with things that matter to us in ways that are often immediate and intuitive. When we step outside in the morning, we do not just see raw colors and shapes. We see the sky, a street, trees, people moving past. Much of what we encounter is meaningful in an objective, shared way. We recognize tables, trees, and other people as part of a common external world, one that others would recognize similarly. These objects seem to physically exist, independent of our perception. Yet these objects do not appear to us as detached, neutral entities. They show up as deeply personal, as meaningful in relation to us. They make us feel certain ways, unique to our own subjective interpretation. A song playing in the background might be unnoticed by most, but stir a powerful memory for someone who hears it. Thus, the meaning we experience is not merely in the external world. It emerges in the meeting between the external world and our own perspective, history, and emotional state. Even before we think about meaning explicitly, we are already living it. A car approaching too quickly is not first perceived as an abstract physical object that we can then judge as dangerous. It is immediately felt as a threat, calling for action. A familiar voice in a crowd does not first appear as raw sound that we later assign significance to. It is instantly recognized. The world shows up as something we can move through, respond to, and make sense of. But what determines the way meaning presents itself in experience? Why do certain aspects of the world stand out to us while others fade into the background? How do our intentions and actions shape this process? To explore these questions, we must examine how meaning arises in our everyday lives. All right, so engagement and concern. Much of our experience unfolds without conscious effort. We do not typically step back to analyze the world. Rather, we are engaged in it, acting within meaning rather than deliberating over it. For example, we don't first perceive a door as a neutral physical object that we then interpret as something to push open. It is simply something we move through without hesitation. Likewise, when we reach for a cup of coffee, we do not analyze its physical properties. We presuppose its meaning, feeling its warmth, lifting it effortlessly, and taking a sip. Our engagement with the world is largely unconscious. We rely on automatic subconscious processes that allow us to move through familiar environments effortlessly. Walking across a room, reaching for an object, or responding to a familiar situation requires no deliberate thought. We simply act. Yet, even though much of our experience unfolds automatically, we do not experience the world as a blur of undifferentiated details. Certain things stand out to us while others remain unnoticed. Why is this? What determines which aspects of our surroundings capture our attention while others fade into the background? One way to think about the meaning we experience is through our concern, what we are doing, what matters to us in the moment. We do not become aware of objects or details simply because they exist. Rather, they stand out because they are relevant to us. As our concerns shift, so does the significance of what we encounter. For example, a cup of coffee might feel inviting when we are tired, yet unappealing late at night. If we are expecting an important call, our phone might feel like the most important object in the room. When we are happy, the world seems brighter, more inviting, and full of opportunities. When we are anxious, the same objects may feel dull or even threatening. Our concerns structure our engagement, pointing us toward what matters in the moment. A set of keys on a table may seem insignificant until we need to leave the house. At that moment, the keys take on vivid significance as our focus aligns with our immediate goal of finding them. Our surroundings reorganize themselves around this goal. Surfaces and containers become significant as potential hiding places, while irrelevant details fade into the background of awareness. Much of this process is habitual. Just as our concerns determine what appears meaningful, our engagements with objects and actions are shaped by patterns of repetition. They become second nature through experience. Consider how tools and objects fade into the background as we use them. When we write with a pen, our focus is on the words, not the pen itself. The pen seamlessly becomes an extension of our hand, its presence fully integrated into the act of writing. This disappearance of the pen from our conscious focus does not necessarily suggest meaninglessness. Rather, we can consider that its significance as a tool is realized precisely in its effortless integration into our action. As we develop skills and familiarity with actions, meaning seemingly becomes embodied. Our engagements become fluid, intuitive, and automatic, allowing us to focus on what we can do. When learning to type, for instance, each movement initially requires deliberate focus to coordinate our fingers. However, over time, these actions become habitual. Eventually, we are able to type without thinking about the placement of each key, allowing our attention to shift towards the words themselves rather than the mechanics of typing. But we can also consider how we integrate more than just physical skills, how learning itself expands what is possible for us. As we acquire new information, we come to understand not just more about the world, but more about what we can do within it. Language is a clear example of this. When we learn a new word or phrase, we are not simply memorizing sounds or symbols, we are gaining a new way to express ourselves, a new way to shape meaning in communication. Just as a craftsman with a new tool can build in ways that were previously impossible, an expanded vocabulary allows us to articulate thoughts we might not have been able to express before. Meaning becomes part of our experience as we expand our ways of engaging with the world. Just as we no longer think about how to move our fingers when typing, we also cease to actively question the meaning of familiar concepts, roles, or interactions. We simply act within them. What we have learned affects what we take for granted, shaping not only our actions but also our way of perceiving and interpreting the world. Interestingly, this extends to how we experience space itself. Objects do not appear to us as abstract points in a mathematical grid. Rather, we perceive them in relation to our ability to engage with them. A chair across the room is not simply an object at a distance, it is right there, ready to be sat on. A doorway is not just an opening in a wall, it is something that transitions us from one space to another. Space itself takes on meaning through our capacity to act. When we are tired or injured, a room that usually feels close may suddenly feel distant and difficult to reach. A staircase may seem effortless to climb one day and feel like an obstacle the next. What we can do in a given moment shapes how we perceive our environment, influencing not just our sense of distance, but also the opportunities or limitations that space presents. Most of the time, our interactions with the world unfold effortlessly, guided by familiarity and embodied meaning. But there are moments, however brief, when this seamless engagement falters and we become aware of meaning that would otherwise remain unnoticed. Perhaps we instinctively reach for an object only to realize it is not where we expected, or something in our environment suddenly feels unfamiliar, catching our attention in a way it normally wouldn't. When something disrupts our engagement, it breaks the flow of concern, forcing us to reorient ourselves. A tool that suddenly fails, an object that is unexpectedly missing, or an event that doesn't align with our expectations, all of these interrupt our habitual way of acting, making us pause and reassess. Disruption forces us to reflect on aspects of meaning we usually take for granted. When a pen runs out of ink, for example, what was once an unnoticed tool suddenly demands our attention. In that moment, we are forced to reflect on the meaning we had previously presupposed, shifting our engagement to diagnosing the disruption. Instead of simply acting within meaning, we become aware of meaning itself. We must reconsider what we were doing and why the disruption matters. Therefore, we can acknowledge that much of what we take for granted in our understanding of the world remains beneath awareness, embedded in habitual action, embodied skills, and intuitive navigation of space. The moment we consciously reflect on what we are doing, we can recognize many layers of meaning that structure even the most automatic behaviors. Through reflection, we become explicitly aware of the meaning implicit in our engagement. This shift from acting within meaning to stepping back and considering it now becomes our focus. What is the experience of reflection like? How does our understanding of meaning change when we actively reflect on it? Okay, so then reflecting on meaning. Reflection fundamentally affects our experience of meaning. When we reflect on the world, aspects of it become explicit in experience. For example, when we reflect on an object like a chair, we no longer just sit in it, we consider its distinct properties, its shape, material, size, and function, that make it identifiable as a chair and not something else. Similarly, we can reflect on things that are not immediately present. If someone asks us to imagine a chair, we can visualize a particular shape or material, making aspects of reality mentally present through thought. Reflection separates us from immediate action, allowing us to analyze, categorize, and conceptualize meaning rather than simply engaging with it. Notably, explicit meaning feels stable and objective. When we explicitly recognize an object, for example, as a chair, we take its meaning as a fact about reality, not merely subjective interpretation, but an objective feature of the world. Thus, we intuitively regard objects and their properties as existing independently of our thoughts. For example, a cat would still be a cat regardless of whether we think about it. However, this feeling of certainty does not guarantee actual certainty. We often feel completely sure about things that later turn out to be incorrect. This suggests that our sense of certainty does not primarily reflect the truth, but has more to do with how our minds facilitate experience, how meaning is presented to us. Interestingly, even when we recognize our errors, this realization comes with a similar feeling of certainty. I was wrong. Likewise, acknowledging explicit uncertainty reflects a determinate possibility about reality. I might be able to achieve my goal. These experiences do not only indicate a lack of knowledge, they reflect explicit facts about reality. We can notice that explicit meaning is shaped by language, not merely as a tool to describe experience, but as the very structure that frames what we explicitly perceive. Even before we are consciously aware of it, language organizes our experience into discernible categories. We perceive a pen, a chair, or a tree with properties such as shiny, sturdy, or tall. Words seemingly provide fixed reference points that allow us to maintain complex meanings across time. Words serve as stimuli that activate broader, structured thoughts, replacing the need for direct sensory perception. When we both see a chair or simply hear the word chair, we tend to perceive aspects of the same concept. Consider a child who does not yet know the word chair. Before learning the word, the child encounters the chair through action, as something to sit on, climb, or play around, an ambiguous category embedded in their direct engagement. The chair is practically meaningful, but not yet explicitly defined. Once the child learns the word chair, however, a boundary is drawn. The category is now explicitly identifiable, allowing them to recognize it, refer to it, and relate to it in more complex ways. However, language is not static. Words shift in meaning depending on context, cultural background, and historical development. The word light, for instance, can refer to brightness in one context and weight in another, demonstrating that meaning is not absolute but depends on linguistic and conceptual relationships. Over time, meanings evolve alongside cultural and societal changes. Consider how the word broadcast originally referred to scattering seeds across a field, but now commonly means transmitting radio or television signals. The word freedom provides a more abstract and subtle example. Once primarily understood in terms of legal status, it later expanded to include personal autonomy, political rights, and even freedom of thought. As new experiences and ways of engaging with the world emerge, so too does the significance that language conveys, shaping how we understand and communicate meaning. In one sense, our vocabulary, syntax, and expressions afford us what we perceive and articulate within the context of our unique circumstances. However, just as language enables us to make meaning explicit, it also shapes the limits of what we can conceptualize. If a culture has no word for a concept, that concept is far more difficult to grasp, relate to, and discuss with others. Certain experiences or intuitions may remain just beyond the reach of articulation, even if they are deeply felt or understood in other ways. Crucially, our reflections do not comprehensively capture everything we know about the world. We can list reasons why something is a chair, but we would still be unable to articulate everything we unconsciously understand about it. Much of what we know remains implicit, embodied in our skills, habits, and ways of engaging with the world. The richness of meaning always exceeds what we grasp explicitly. Our concepts and words provide a structured way of thinking about reality, but never fully encompass the depth of our experience. This gap between our felt, implicit understanding and our limited, explicit knowledge is precisely where science can help. While reflection allows us to make meaning explicit, it remains limited by our personal perspective and the constraints of our ability to conceptualize aspects of our experience through language. Empirical science provides us with a complementary perspective, offering vocabulary, concepts, and insights that help make us make sense of meaning beyond intuition alone. Okay, so here is our pivot into the science of basically what we've just been talking about. The science of experience. Thus far, we have explored how meaning emerges in experience, becomes explicit through reflection, and is structured by language. However, while reflection reveals aspects of meaning, it does not explain how meaning itself is formed. It only makes it more accessible to us. Philosophers have long speculated on the nature of meaning, but speculation alone leaves us without a clear foundation for understanding the mechanisms behind it. Modern science provides us with a way forward. Instead of relying solely on intuition, we now have the ability to examine how meaning arises at a biological and cognitive level, how perception, memory, and expectation shape what appears meaningful to us. Cognitive science, neuroscience, and evolutionary theory allow us to trace the origins and structure of meaning itself, suggesting why it feels objective, stable, and self-evident in experience. By grounding our intuitions in empirical research, we refine our conceptualization of meaning, not by replacing experience with abstraction, but by illuminating the processes that make the experience of meaning possible in the first place. We start with an evolutionary perspective. To understand how meaning is shaped by our biology, we can begin with evolution. Evolutionary biology provides a pragmatic perspective for why we experience the world as we do, offering insight into both the development of the brain and the structure of cognition. The human brain is an evolutionary product, shaped over millions of years by environmental pressures. Our experience of meaning, then, is an emergent consequence of systems that originally evolved for survival, navigation, and prediction. By examining the trajectory of evolution, we can gain insight into why we perceive and interpret the world in the way that we do today. Evolution is a gradual, cumulative process driven by natural selection, the mechanism by which traits that enhance survival and reproduction become more prevalent in a population over successive generations. With each generation, small genetic variations arise through random mutations during reproduction. While most mutations are inconsequential, some provide advantages that improve an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Over countless generations, these traits accumulate, eventually leading to the emergence of entirely new structures, abilities, and behaviors. Significant transformations, such as the development of the human brain, usually require immense spans of time, hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. Importantly, evolution does not unfold with a specific purpose in mind. Some traits arrive as adaptations, meaning they were directly selected for their survival benefits. Others develop as exaptations, traits that originally evolved for one function but were later co-opted for another. For example, feathers likely evolved initially for thermoregulation before being exapted for flight. Similarly, advanced cognitive abilities such as abstract reasoning and language may have emerged as extensions of more primitive survival functions. Beyond adaptation and exaptation, some traits emerge as evolutionary byproducts, or spandrels. These arise not through direct selection, but as structural consequences of other traits. A classic example is the human capacity for reading and writing. Our brains were never directly selected for literacy, but reading emerged as a byproduct of neural structures originally evolved for object recognition and spoken language processing. Understanding the trajectory of evolution is a retrospective process. We determine whether a trait is an adaptation, exaptation, or spandrel only in hindsight, by examining its origins, its survival role, and its structural dependencies. New discoveries continually shift our interpretations, revealing deeper insights into how cognitive faculties developed and were repurposed over time. Regardless of how our cognitive abilities emerged, we can consider how they may have provided evolutionary advantages. The capacity to extract meaning from the environment likely enabled early humans to navigate, predict, and respond to their surroundings more effectively. A trait does not need to have evolved for meaning making specifically in order to be crucial for survival. Rather, any ability that enhances perception, recognition, and response to environmental stimuli naturally contributes to the emergence of meaning itself. This evolutionary perspective helps explain why we do not experience a direct reflection of external reality. Instead, our perception is the result of complex neural processes that organize, filter, and structure raw sensory information into meaningful experience. This ability to not only detect stimuli but to interpret them likely conferred a survival advantage, allowing our ancestors to act upon environmental information with greater efficiency and precision. For example, our sensory systems are finely tuned to specific environmental stimuli, enabling us to perceive ranges of light, sound, and smell that were likely crucial for survival. Human vision, for instance, is limited to the visible spectrum of light, a range that was sufficient for navigating the world during daylight. Similarly, our hearing is attuned to frequencies that helped us detect danger and communicate effectively. While evolution provides a broad framework for understanding why cognitive faculties emerged, it does not explain how they are implemented in the brain. The faculties that shape our experience of meaning, perception, memory, prediction, and abstraction, arise from the brain's underlying structure. To fully grasp how meaning is constructed, we can now turn to the brain's evolved architecture, exploring how its hierarchical organization facilitates the way we interpret and engage with the world. Alright, so this is what evolution made, the brain's evolved structure. The cognitive faculties shaped by evolution emerged from the brain's deeply integrated biological architecture. Its development was a cumulative process, where newer capacities emerged by forming intricate connections with older, more primitive structures, fundamentally rewiring and reshaping their functions. Understanding this structure allows us to see how meaning arises from the constant dialogue between survival instincts, emotion, and higher reasoning that collectively shapes our perception of reality. To make sense of this complexity, it is useful to adopt a conceptual framework that distinguishes between the brain's functions based on their evolutionary history. While these are not physically separate layers, this model helps us understand how different systems evolved to handle distinct challenges and now interact to produce our experience. Using this framework, we can identify the most ancient structures found deep within the brain, which govern basic survival instincts. These regions, which we share with distant ancestors, handle immediate life-sustaining processes. Integrated with these are systems that process emotion and memory. While the foundations of these systems are ancient and shared with other vertebrates, they were significantly enhanced and further developed in early mammals, who required flexible behavior, learned associations, and emotional coordination to thrive. Finally, the most recent expansions of the brain allow for abstract reasoning, reflection, and the capacity to construct complex conceptual meaning, a capability that became crucial as human ancestors faced the demands of tool-making, social cooperation, and symbolic communication. So going through these layers in more detail, the brainstem and basal ganglia, often referred to as the reptilian brain, represent the most primitive and evolutionarily ancient structures. These regions are responsible for basic survival functions, including autonomic regulation, motor control, and threat detection. The periaqueductal gray, for example, is central to defense behaviors, coordinating instinctual reactions such as freezing or fleeing when faced with danger. These structures operate largely outside of conscious awareness, fundamentally shaping what we experience as significant, what is safe, what is dangerous, what demands immediate attention. While they may seem distant from meaning-making in the higher sense, they establish the fundamental priorities that influence what is perceived, what is ignored, and what demands immediate attention. The limbic system is central to emotional processing, memory formation, and social bonding. Structures such as the amygdala, hippocampus, and hypothalamus imbue experiences with affective significance, shaping how we react to and remember events. The hippocampus allows us to link past experiences to the present, forming patterns and associations that shape how we anticipate and interpret the world. The amygdala does more than process fear, it assigns emotional weight to experiences, determining which experiences are worth remembering and prioritizing. The hypothalamus, through its regulation of hormonal and autonomic responses, ensures that emotions are not merely abstract states but embodied experiences, reinforcing meaning through visceral sensation. Crucially, the limbic system also integrates social meaning into experience. As survival for mammals became increasingly dependent on cooperation, neural mechanisms for processing social pain, trust, and affiliation emerged. The anterior cingulate cortex plays a central role in monitoring social rejection, conflict, and group dynamics, demonstrating that the experience of meaning is not purely individual, but shaped by our interactions with others. The neocortex is the newest and most sophisticated expansion of the brain. While other mammals possess a neocortex, in humans, it is vastly expanded, supporting complex reasoning, language, and long-term planning. The prefrontal cortex, in particular, allows for deliberate thought, conceptual abstraction, and self-reflection, providing the ability to construct and analyze meaning beyond immediate sensory experience. Through networks that integrate memory, emotion, and reasoning, the neocortex allows us to not only perceive meaning in the world, but deliberately engage with it. However, while the neocortex allows for explicit reasoning, it does not function independently. Our experience of meaning is shaped and constrained by more primitive systems that prioritize instinct, emotion, and social influences. While the prefrontal cortex can regulate emotional responses, dampening or amplifying affective states, it does not operate as an independent arbiter of reason. The brainstem and limbic system, which govern survival and emotional processing, exert a powerful influence over higher cognition, often framing perception before conscious awareness takes hold. In high-pressure situations, evolutionarily older structures can override deliberate reasoning, prioritizing instinct and survival over reflection. This explains why traumatic memories, processed largely by the amygdala, can trigger immediate fear responses even in neutral settings. Similarly, the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors social rejection and conflict, can generate lingering distress even when the prefrontal cortex recognizes that no real threat exists. These examples illustrate how the brainstem and limbic system can dominate cognition, shaping perception and decision-making through deeply ingrained survival mechanisms that constrain and direct higher reasoning. The integration of brain and body further reinforces how meaning is not purely cognitive. It is viscerally experienced. Sensory input is not just processed in the brain but extends throughout the body, with signals from skin, muscles, and internal organs continuously shaping perception. At the same time, the brain modulates bodily responses, influencing physical sensations that accompany experiences of meaning, such as an elevated heart rate in moments of fear or a sense of warmth in moments of connection. By tracing the evolutionary development of the brain, we gain insight into how meaning emerges from the interaction of survival instincts, emotional processing, and higher reasoning. Meaning is not a single faculty, but the result of a hierarchical, interconnected system where older structures shape what we prioritize and newer structures allow us to interpret, extend, and manipulate meaning beyond direct sensory experience. To better understand how the experience of meaning arises, we can explore how these structures communicate with one another. By examining how different brain regions interact, both within and across these evolutionary layers, we can better understand how the brain integrates perception, memory, and expectation to generate a cohesive experience of meaning. Okay, so now into the nitty-gritty, communication within the brain. The experience of meaning is not produced by a single brain region, but emerges from the dynamic coordination of distributed neural systems. Rather than passively detecting reality, the brain constructs perception, constantly shaping how we interpret and respond to the world. This construction arises through the continuous interplay between neural circuits that determines what is perceived, prioritized, and integrated into consciousness. At its most fundamental level, the brain communicates through an exchange of electrical and chemical signals between neurons, specialized cells that serve as its basic signaling units. Neurons connect at tiny junctions called synapses, where one neuron passes signals to another via chemical messengers known as neurotransmitters. These molecules cross the synaptic gap and bind to receptors on the receiving neuron, either encouraging or inhibiting its response. While each synapse operates on a micro scale, the coordinated activity of many neurons give rise to larger patterns of communication. Some of these patterns are brief and reactive, while others form stable loops that support memory, learning, and long-term behavioral tendencies. Over time, such repeated activity reinforces and refines the brain's functional architecture, shaping how patterns of activity are organized and sustained. Overlaying this local signaling is a broader form of chemical communication, neuromodulation. While neurotransmitters transmit messages between individual neurons, they can also act as neuromodulators and diffuse across broader areas of the brain. Rather than transmitting specific content, neuromodulators, such as dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine, tune the responsiveness of neural populations, altering the likelihood that neurons will respond to incoming signals. In this way, neuromodulators help regulate global brain states, whether we are alert or drowsy, focused or scattered, curious or indifferent. Together, neural signaling and neuromodulation create rhythmic patterns of activity known as brainwaves. These oscillations regulate the timing of neural firing, ensuring that distributed parts of the brain remain synchronized. Brainwaves occur at different frequencies, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, each associated with different modes of cognitive processing, from deep sleep and memory consolidation to focused attention and problem solving. These rhythms don't operate in isolation. Multiple frequencies can coexist across regions, interacting to support different functions simultaneously. By shaping both when and where neurons fire, these foundational processes give rise to higher order patterns of organization. This also extends to emotional and sensory states. Imagining a smell, a painful touch, or a fearful moment activates corresponding sensory or affective regions. When participants read or hear emotionally loaded words or stories, studies show coordinated activity. Lesion studies reveal how damage to specific regions alter perception and behavior. Neuroimaging techniques like fMRI and PET allow us to observe brain activity in real time, and electrophysiological tools such as EEG and MEG track the rhythmic patterns that shape cognition. More recently, brain stimulation approaches have offered causal insight by directly modulating neural activity. Together, these methods show us not only where activity occurs, but how regions coordinate to shape experience. To better understand how the brain constructs experience, we can organize its parts by function rather than location. While every region participates in multiple processes, we can identify clusters of anatomically distinct structures that consistently specialize in particular domains of cognition. These clusters, referred to as functional hubs, serve as the brain's building blocks for tasks like sensation, memory, attention, emotion, and behavior. Each hub contributes to specific aspects of cognitive processing, depending on the type of information it handles and the operations it supports. The following descriptions of these functional roles are detailed. Their purpose is not to turn you into a neuroscientist, but to give a concrete sense of the sheer complexity and coordination involved, and to demonstrate how much of the brain's architecture we can now map onto the intuitive cognitive functions we experience every day. This scientific grounding is significant as it provides the empirical foundation for the broader claims made in this framework. With that in mind, you do not need to memorize these details. Feel free to read them for context or simply skim them to appreciate the underlying complexity before we continue. Similarly, I'll make sure there's a chapter such that you could skip ahead if you don't want to hear all these out. All right, functional hubs associated with sensory integration and embodiment. Our experience begins with the body, how we sense the world and feel our internal states. The thalamus serves as the brain's central relay station, deciding which sights, sounds, and sensations reach conscious awareness. The insula helps us feel what's happening inside our body, like hunger, pain, or a racing heart, and connects these internal signals to emotional states. The parietal cortex gives us a sense of physical space, helping us know where our body is in relation to the world and guiding our movements through it. Functional hubs related to memory and context. To make sense of the present, we constantly draw on the past. The hippocampus organizes our experiences into memories, helping us remember what happened, where it occurred, and how it felt. The medial temporal lobe stores the factual and conceptual knowledge we built up over time, things like language, categories, and associations, allowing us to recognize patterns and navigate familiar situations with ease. All right, emotion and salience. Not everything we perceive holds equal weight. The brain constantly evaluates what is emotionally meaningful or behaviorally important. The amygdala adds emotional intensity to experiences, helping us detect danger, excitement, or novelty. The anterior cingulate cortex monitors for internal conflict or uncertainty, like when something feels off or when we make a mistake. The orbitofrontal cortex helps us weigh different options, especially in emotionally charged or socially complex situations, guiding value-based decisions. Hubs related to attention and reorientation. The brain must strike a balance between staying focused and remaining flexible. The dorsal attention network helps us stay locked in on a chosen task, while the ventral attention network keeps watch for anything unexpected, ready to shift our focus if something important happens. Working in tandem, these systems keep us aligned with both our goals and our surroundings. For executive control and planning, for more deliberate thought and self-regulation, we rely on the brain's executive control systems. The prefrontal cortex guides planning, decision-making, and impulse control, helping us think before we act. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, in particular, keeps our goals in mind, allowing us to juggle information and prioritize what matters. When we need to stop and reassess, the inferior frontal gyrus steps in, helping us pause and inhibit automatic responses. Finally, action, habit, and motor planning. Much of life unfolds through practice routines, actions we've repeated so often that they no longer require conscious effort. The basal ganglia store these behavioral patterns, allowing us to navigate familiar tasks without having to think them through each time. The cerebellum, traditionally associated with movement, also plays a role in predicting what's likely to happen next, helping us adjust our actions smoothly and efficiently. Ultimately, our experience emerges from dynamic coordination across distributed systems. The regions we just discussed ultimately contribute to distributed functional networks, which operate at a higher level of abstraction and carry out complex functions like attention, planning, emotion regulation, and memory retrieval. Where functional hubs tell us what each region is specialized to do, functional networks show us how these regions collaborate. Understanding them allows us to move from a map of brain parts to a model of how cognition unfolds across time, from sensation to meaning to action. Again, the goal is not to memorize every term and function, but to appreciate the distinct roles these large-scale systems play in creating a cohesive experience. Okay, we could start with arousal and readiness. We begin with the foundation of consciousness. Whether we are daydreaming, solving a problem, or reacting to a surprise, the brain must first be awake, alert, and ready to respond. That role belongs to the reticular activating system, a brainstem structure that regulates overall arousal and readiness. Like a dimmer switch for consciousness, it determines how sensitive we are to internal goals and external stimuli, setting the tone for every experience that follows. This leads us to salience and relevance detection. Once the brain is engaged, it must determine what deserves its attention. That filtering begins with the salience network, which constantly monitors the body and environment for signals of importance. Whether it's a flash of memory, a sudden sound, or a shift in bodily state, the salience network flags what is emotionally charged, behaviorally relevant, or personally meaningful. This network helps prioritize the most pressing or meaningful inputs, guiding the brain to focus on what matters most in the moment. Attentional orientation. After salience is assessed, attention is mobilized. The dorsal and ventral attention networks help us balance concentration with flexibility. The dorsal attention network supports top-down focus on tasks we've chosen, like reading, writing, or searching for a specific object, while the ventral attention network remains attuned to the unexpected, ready to redirect our focus if something novel or urgent arises. Together, these systems ensure we can remain both steady and adaptable, shifting focus when needed without losing sight of our goals. All right, then deliberate thought and control. When sustained focused thought is required, the central executive network steps in. It supports deliberate reasoning, planning, and working memory, allowing us to hold goals in mind, solve problems, and act intentionally in the face of competing demands. This network helps filter distractions and keep our thinking organized, especially in complex or unfamiliar situations. Then spontaneous thought. In contrast, when the brain is not actively engaged in a focused task, activity shifts towards the default mode network. This system supports inward-directed processes like spontaneous self-related thought, autobiographical memory retrieval, and mental simulation, the kinds of background activities that emerge during rest or passive introspection. The DMN constructs a kind of mental backdrop against which focused thought and action occur, helping us weave together past experiences, imagine future scenarios, and maintain a sense of continuity and identity over time. Then, sensory integration. While many cognitive networks operate at an abstract level, all mental activity is ultimately grounded in the body. The sensory and motor networks serve as the brain's interface with the external world, processing sights, sounds, and physical sensations, and translating intention into coordinated movement. These systems ensure that perception remains tied to action, allowing us to navigate, manipulate, and respond to our environment in real time. Then finally, habitual action and routine. Finally, much of our daily life unfolds through habit and routine. The brain's procedural systems store patterns of behavior that have become automatic through repetition. These systems reduce cognitive effort, allowing us to navigate familiar tasks like walking or speaking without requiring conscious effort. In doing so, they free up mental resources for more adaptive and flexible thinking. So together, these brain networks form a complex, coordinated system for navigating the world, one that can reflect, plan, react, feel, and move. These systems constantly shift, communicate, and recalibrate based on changing needs and environments. All right, so now we can bridge this all together. So far, we have explored the grand arc of our brain's evolution, the layered yet deeply interconnected architecture it produced, and the intricate web of neural networks that allow it to function. This raises a fundamental question. What is the unifying principle that makes sense of all this complexity? Why is the brain structured this way? And what essential purpose organizes its constant, complex activity? Our account of evolution and our exploration of brain function together imply a unifying principle, a fundamental imperative for a living system to actively manage its internal state to stay alive and eventually to flourish. Empirical science has discovered that this concept, known as homeostasis, applies to every living organism, from a single cell to complex human beings. In humans, homeostasis involves the automated regulation of countless variables, temperature, nutrient levels, oxygen, and more, ensuring the body remains within the narrow range of conditions compatible with life. It is the biological drama from which all else, including the mind, emerges. The connection between the brain and these bodily systems is not occasional or partial. It is a continuous, bidirectional stream that constitutes the very foundation of our conscious experience. Key brain regions, such as the brainstem and the insular cortex, are dedicated to interoception, the moment-to-moment sensing of the body's internal landscape. The brain doesn't just send commands down to the body, it receives a constant, rich flow of information from the body's visceral and chemical state. This incoming information eventually affects our felt experience, our moods, our energy levels, our appetites, and our general sense of well-being or malaise. This leads us to a crucial unifying insight. Cognition is not confined to the brain, but emerges from the fundamental biological imperative of life regulation. The theory of embodied cognition encompasses a diverse family of perspectives that offer a powerful framework for making sense of this. Our thoughts, perceptions, and understanding emerge from a deep integration between brain, body, and environment. These approaches challenge older models that treat the mind as a disembodied processor, proposing instead that our cognitive processes are grounded in the physical body, its physiology, affective states, sensory and motor capacities, and its active engagement with the world. This embodied framework reframes the very nature of experienced meaning, grounding it not in abstract logic, but in the visceral, moment-to-moment evaluation of our well-being. A situation that promises to enhance our well-being feels positive and attracts us. A situation that threatens it feels negative and repels us. These patterns don't stay confined to the brain. They are distributed across our muscles, posture, breathing, and internal sensations. Our gut feelings, for instance, are not just a metaphor. The vast network of neurons in our gut, the enteric nervous system, is in constant communication with the brain, influencing our intuitive judgments and emotional states based on the ongoing processes of digestion and metabolic regulation. A threat makes the heart race. A comforting memory can ease tension in the body. These aren't secondary effects. They are integral parts of what meaning feels like. One of the most well-supported findings in this field is that the experience of meaning involves neural simulation. Brain imaging studies consistently show that when we think about or perceive an action, like grasping or kicking, the brain reactivates motor areas involved in performing those actions. This also extends to emotional and sensory states. Imagining a smell, a painful touch, or a fearful moment activates corresponding sensory or affective regions. When people read or hear emotionally loaded words or stories, studies show coordinated activation in limbic structures and somatosensory areas, indicating that our understanding is grounded in the simulation of embodied homeostatic states. Embodied cognition also emphasizes that cognition is situated. It unfolds in real-world contexts. We don't think in abstraction. We think while acting, perceiving, and responding to real environments. Psychological and behavioral studies show that perception changes depending on the body's state and goals. A hill looks steeper when our energy reserves are low. An object appears closer when we intend to use it. This homeostatic influence also profoundly shapes our memory. When we recall an event, the brain reactivates patterns associated with the original experience, but this occurs within the context of our current bodily state and feelings. This is why a memory can feel different each time we access it. A fond memory might lose its warmth when we are feeling ill or stressed, while the sting of a past failure can be softened by a present sense of security. Each act of remembering is a new, embodied event, generating fresh emotional responses that are shaped by our present moment homeostasis. Neuroscience reveals that brain areas integrate bodily posture, spatial awareness, and motor affordances into conscious perception. The concept of affordances explains that we don't just see things, we see what we can do with them. This principle helps explain why meaning emerges through possibilities for action that serve our well-being, not abstract facts. Even abstract thought is grounded in this structure. Studies using metaphor processing, problem-solving tasks, and gesture-linked cognition show that conceptual understanding often involves internalizing patterns of bodily interaction. For example, understanding a metaphor like grasping an idea activates both motor and prefrontal regions, suggesting that our language and reasoning are scaffolded on embodied experiences aimed at managing our world. This framework helps us reinterpret everything we've discussed. The brainstem doesn't just regulate autonomic function, it establishes the body's readiness for engagement based on its homeostatic state. The limbic system doesn't merely influence emotion, it anchors meaning in the visceral experience of what helps or harms us. The neocortex doesn't operate in a vacuum, it develops complex plans and models of the world in service of the body's fundamental needs. Meaning is ultimately experienced as a physiological, affective, and action-oriented event, fundamentally shaped by and involved in the body's homeostatic goals. This view reveals that our entire biological system is not merely reactive, passively waiting for the world to act upon it. To effectively manage its internal state, it must be proactive. The intricate coordination of these brain and body networks is fundamentally organized around anticipating the body's needs and the world's demands before they arrive. And this leads us to predictive processing. To stay alive, our biological system evolved to be proactive, constantly anticipating the body's needs and the world's demands to effectively manage its internal state. The most influential framework for explaining this mechanism is predictive processing, which specifically proposes that the brain's core function is not to passively react to the world, but to actively predict it. It is through this continuous cycle of prediction and correction that the brain achieves predictive homeostasis, allowing us to navigate the world, learn, and create meaning. At every moment, the brain generates expectations about the state of the body and the environment, anticipating what we are likely to perceive, feel, or need next. These expectations form an internal model of reality, which the brain compares to actual sensory input. When predictions align with incoming data, we experience coherence. When they diverge, the discrepancy is registered as prediction error, a signal that something needs to change in our model or behavior. This cycle of prediction and correction gives rise to perception, learning, emotion, and behavior. Predictive processing explains how the brain balances stability and adaptability, how it economizes energy, and how it constructs meaning from uncertainty. Empirical evidence supports this model across many domains. Neuroimaging shows that error detection signals appear throughout sensory and cognitive regions. Electrophysiology demonstrates that perception is shaped by expectations even at early stages of processing, and studies of learning show that we remember and update information when our predictions are violated. This framework offers not just a theory of perception, but a unifying explanation for how the brain interprets reality. Evolutionary pressures likely shaped this architecture long before conscious reasoning evolved. In an unpredictable world, early organisms that could anticipate threats, locate resources, and navigate social environments were more likely to survive and reproduce. A brain that could model future states, however roughly, had an advantage in avoiding danger, seizing opportunity, and maintaining cohesion within a group. An organism primed to respond to rustling in the bushes as a possible predator would be more likely to survive, even if most rustling turned out to be harmless. Similarly, anticipating social dynamics carried survival value. Being attuned to social rejection or group conflict helped ensure belonging in early human communities, where exclusion often meant death. These ancient survival-oriented models remain embedded in the brain's architecture today, underpinning even our most abstract experiences of expectation, attention, and meaning. Predictive processing makes sense of the evolutionary hierarchical architecture of the brain, as we previously discussed. Higher levels of the brain encode more abstract long-range patterns, such as goals, social meaning, or self-identity, while lower levels track more immediate, fine-grained sensory details. Predictions flow downward through this hierarchy, informing what we expect to see, hear, or feel. When mismatches occur, prediction errors are sent back up, prompting updates to refine the model. This recursive structure allows the brain to remain stable in familiar contexts while remaining responsive to change. Over time, minimizing these errors leads to a more accurate and adaptive model of the world. Further supporting evidence for this predictive homeostasis spans numerous domains of neuroscience. Neuroimaging and electrophysiological studies show that perceptual regions of the brain are shaped by top-down expectations before stimuli even arrive. Error signals such as mismatch negativity and EEG mark the brain's real-time detection of unexpected input. fMRI and MEG studies have traced how prediction and error flow through layered cortical networks, consistent with the architecture proposed by predictive coding. This framework thus integrates perception, cognition, action, and emotion under a shared computational principle. The brain strives to minimize surprise. Crucially, the brain can minimize prediction error in two ways: by updating its internal model to better reflect the world, as in perception or learning, or by acting on the world to make it conform to its expectations, a process known as active inference. This is the core of behavior. We are driven to fulfill predictions that ultimately serve our homeostatic needs. We reach for an object not just because we perceive it, but because we expect it to be there and to behave according to our needs. We can further understand this homeostatic drive under the free energy principle, which suggests that biological systems evolve and operate to reduce uncertainty and maintain internal coherence. Uncertainty is metabolically expensive, demanding attention, glucose, and neural resources. In contrast, stable and accurate predictions conserve energy. The brain therefore aims to minimize prediction error by acting on the world and efficiently updating its internal models accordingly. Learning and adaptation are gated by the relevance of prediction errors, modulated by arousal, affect, and significance. This is where neuromodulation plays a critical role. Neuromodulators like dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and serotonin regulate the brain's readiness to learn, adapt, or reinforce existing expectations. Dopamine, for example, is closely tied to prediction success. When reality turns out better than expected, dopamine levels spike, reinforcing the behavior or belief that led to the positive outcome. When things go as expected, dopamine remains stable, reinforcing habitual models. But if reality falls short of expectation, dopamine levels drop, signaling that something needs to change, either in behavior, belief, or focus. Other neuromodulators shape how the brain handles uncertainty and significance. Norepinephrine spikes when prediction errors are large or surprising, increasing arousal and directing attention toward the unexpected input. Acetylcholine enhances plasticity, tuning the brain to notice and encode relevant new information. Serotonin, by contrast, appears to mediate the brain's response to uncertainty more globally. When serotonin is high, it promotes stability and model persistence. When low, it opens the system to revision and increases sensitivity to possible change. This neurochemical tuning helps us understand that we experience significant homeostatically relevant prediction errors as feelings and emotions. A sudden negative surprise, a mismatch between our prediction of safety and the reality of a threat, is not processed neutrally. It is felt as a jolt of fear or anxiety. Conversely, a positive prediction error, an outcome that is better than we expected, is felt as joy or relief. From this perspective, our entire affective life, from subtle moods to intense emotions, is the brain's real-time, embodied summary of how well its predictions are matching the reality of its internal and external world. Ultimately, these systems determine not only whether we notice an error, but how we respond to it, whether we adapt, ignore, or resist. When learning feels effortless, such as when a new idea fits neatly into what we've already known, neuromodulators reinforce our existing models with minimal effort. But when learning is difficult, the brain experiences greater metabolic and emotional costs. Solving a complex problem may require heightened attention and glucose consumption in specific cortical areas, particularly the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. In contrast, being confronted with a deeply held belief that turns out to be false may activate emotional centers like the amygdala, triggering frustration, anxiety, or resistance. In such cases, the emotional cost of learning can outweigh the cognitive one. What makes learning feel hard is not always the complexity of the information, but the threat it poses to our current models of self or world. This is why some prediction errors are easily integrated, for example, correcting a spelling mistake, while others feel threatening, especially when they challenge our identity or deeply held beliefs. In those cases, emotional regions like the amygdala may activate in defense, making us anxious, frustrated, or resistant to change. The cost of learning isn't always cognitive, it's often emotional. The brain may cling to old models not out of irrationality, but because stability, even when flawed, can feel safer than uncertainty. Still, in less charged situations, prediction errors are the engine of adaptation. Every movement, perception, and interpretation involves a constant stream of micro-predictions and corrections. We unconsciously fine-tune muscle movements, adjust our interpretations of speech in noisy environments, and revise our understanding of ambiguous situations, all without needing to think about it. This seamless calibration allows us to move through familiar environments without effort, and when something unexpected happens, our awareness shifts towards the source of the discrepancy. Ultimately, the experience of meaning emerges from the tension between expectation and reality. We don't find things meaningful because of their physical features alone, but because they confirm, violate, or reshape what we anticipate, filtered through memory, emotion, and relevance. Smooth predictions create fluency and comfort. Violated expectations create interest, surprise, or confusion. Deep contradictions create existential discomfort. In each case, the brain registers significance when its models of the world needs to change. The predictive processing framework thus offers more than a theory of perception. It offers a theory of experience. From motor reflexes to moral beliefs, the brain constructs and updates a reality that feels stable because it is predicted. Our sense of what is true, important, or meaningful arises through this continuous negotiation between what we expect and what the world presents. In this view, meaning is not a static insight. It is the ongoing, dynamic refinement of the models that allow us to act, learn, and make sense of the world. All right, in this one last subsection, we connect everything we've just talked about together, making sense of the scientific in relation to the intuitive that we started out with, making sense of experience. Having explored how meaning arises in lived experience and traced the scientific processes that shape it, we can now bring these perspectives into alignment. We intuitively experience the world as meaningful, yet this immediacy does not itself explain why it feels meaningful in the first place, why certain things appear obvious, important, or self-evident. Although the hard problem of consciousness, why subjective experience exists at all, remains unresolved, we can nevertheless identify clear, systematic relationships between experience and the biological and cognitive mechanisms that generate it. These correspondences help ground our intuitions without reducing them to neural processes. By reinterpreting phenomenological insights through the lens of homeostasis, embodied cognition, and predictive processing, we gain a more complete account of how meaning is constructed. Meaning does not arise solely from external features of the world, but from the brain's continuous modeling of sensory and bodily states in relation to its core goal, maintaining homeostasis. We are not passive recipients of information. We are embodied agents actively generating experience through cycles of prediction, feedback, and affective evaluation. Much of this unfolds through habitual engagement. Predictive models guide smooth, intuitive interactions with the world, supported by systems like the basal ganglia, which allow us to navigate familiar situations without conscious effort. These actions are so well modeled that they generate no noticeable prediction error. The result is an often unnoticed feeling of fluency or ease, the result of our brain successfully minimizing surprise and conserving metabolic energy. Even when we are not consciously focused, the brain remains active. The default mode network supports spontaneous, inward-directed cognition, linking memories, imagination, and self-representation. This creates a coherent personal narrative, organizing past events and simulating possible futures to refine the predictive models we use to navigate the world. While this background activity is difficult to consciously notice, and thus did not surface in our earlier intuitive observations, it establishes a backdrop that shapes how we ultimately interpret the world. When attention shifts from passive drift to deliberate focus, activity increases in the central executive network and dorsal attention network, allowing us to update models in real time and align expectations with unfolding events. Attention is not merely a spotlight, it is the selective stabilization of models that matter. Even when we habitually engage with the world, moments of focused attention allow us to recalibrate our expectations in real time, updating predictions and minimizing error. This kind of attention is not always self-conscious. It can emerge fluidly in response to task demands, yet it influences our awareness of what matters in the moment. In this sense, focus is the alignment of attention with a stable and meaningful predictive model. At times, our attention shifts not just toward a task, but towards the significance of what we are doing or perceiving. This shift from implicit familiarity to explicit recognition is what we have described as reflection. While we often associate reflection with deliberate, self-conscious thought, many reflective processes are fast, subtle, and go unnoticed. When we scan a new room, adjust to a social cue, or momentarily question what we're seeing, we are already engaging in reflective activity, even if we don't register it as such. In these moments, elements of experience briefly become thematically grasped, a discrepancy is noticed, a prediction updated, or a pattern recognized. What defines reflection, then, is not sustained effort or introspective awareness, but the emergence of meaning into thought, however briefly, such that it becomes available to evaluation, adjustment, or stabilization. Neurocognitively, these shifts engage many of the same systems active during deliberate reflection. Networks integrating perception, memory, language, and emotion, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, medial temporal lobe, and salience network, contribute to both intuitive micro-adjustments and extended introspective thought. Reflection, in this view, is not a rare achievement of self-awareness, but a recursive process by which the brain makes its models available to revision. It can occur through sudden insight, subtle reappraisal, or momentary attentional shifts, each drawing on shared mechanisms for recognizing, representing, and refining what matters. Embodied cognition describes the physical foundation of this entire process. Meaning is not only cognitively acknowledged, it is felt through the body as the experience of well or poorly managed homeostasis. Theories of embodied cognition emphasize that understanding is rooted in bodily states, motor capacities, and affective responses. Neural systems involved in sensory motor processing are reactivated during thought and language comprehension, and brain imaging studies show that even abstract concepts engage areas linked to action and emotion. This responsiveness is modulated by the brain's salient systems, which continuously evaluate what matters. The anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex prioritize behaviorally relevant information, tuning attention and emotional response in line with bodily and environmental cues. This corresponds directly with our earlier phenomenological insight. Our experience is structured by concern, and concern determines what stands out. Our physical condition and mood shape not only how we feel, but what we perceive as possible. This is supported by the limbic system, the insula, and the anterior cingulate cortex. These systems shape experience, affecting the brain's predictions about what actions are viable or what outcomes are likely. This is why, when the body is in pain, even a short walk can feel daunting, or why a bad mood can make the world seem flat or meaningless. This further suggests that meaning is not located in physical objects. It emerges through the body's dynamic orientation to the world in service of its homeostatic goals. Integral to this whole process are neuromodulators, chemical messengers that shape emotional response and regulate how strongly the brain updates its models based on prediction, success, or failure. Dopamine, of note, has been closely linked to reward prediction error. When outcomes exceed expectations, dopamine tends to increase, reinforcing the behavior and validating the model. When outcomes match expectations, dopamine levels remain stable. When reality falls short of our expectations, dopamine levels decrease, signaling that something may need to change. Furthermore, norepinephrine heightens alertness in response to surprise. Acetylcholine sharpens attention and learning in novel situations. Serotonin regulates our tolerance for ambiguity, shaping how open or resistant we are to change. Together, these systems influence not just what we learn, but how we feel about learning, how confident, threatened, or flexible we become in response to new meaning. This neurochemical process helps us understand why we often feel certainty when reflecting on the world. When predictions are confirmed, that success is not only processed cognitively, but is also accompanied by a sense of intuitive fluency, confidence, and clarity. We can think of this affective reinforcement as what gives meaning its felt immediacy, why certainty feels intuitive rather than merely inferred. This is the feeling of a low-energy, stable, and effectively regulated state. Likewise, when our core expectations are violated, the resulting prediction error doesn't just register as informational, it can be experienced as discomfort, doubt, or even distress. In both cases, meaning does not merely appear to us, it is felt. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's work further explains how the brain uses these felt states to guide our choices. When faced with a course of action, our brain rapidly simulates the potential outcomes and generates an associated visceral bodily feeling for each one. A positive feeling of ease or confidence pushes us towards a decision. A negative feeling of unease or alarm pushes us away. This is the neurological basis for our gut instincts, revealing how our most rational decisions are profoundly shaped by the body's wisdom in predicting future states of well-being. Ultimately, we can intuit that our experience of reality is not merely a direct apprehension of objective reality. It is a felt experience, constructed through the recursive interaction of brain, body, and environment. Meaning arises through the brain's ongoing effort to model a world that is coherent, adaptive, and actionable. Some models are flexible, easily revised in light of new evidence. Others, especially those tied to survival, identity, or long-held beliefs, are more rigid. When disrupted, they don't just produce cognitive dissonance, they produce existential discomfort, the feeling of a high-level prediction error about our well-being. In all cases, the brain is not merely interpreting reality, it is actively shaping it, in accordance with what it expects the world to be. All right, and then our transition into the next section and video. Crucially, these models are not fixed. They are continually shaped by our accumulated experiences, biological predispositions, social environments, and moment-to-moment internal states. Thus, meaning, as it reveals itself in experience, is not static, but dynamically updated through recursive loops of prediction, feedback, and emotional evaluation. This brings us to the next step, understanding the conditions that shape how we understand in the first place. If our experience of meaning is not given by the world itself, but constructed through predictive models, shaped by memory, mood, attention, and concern, then those models determine what appears meaningful in the first place. And because these models are shaped over time by biological predispositions, developmental history, and cultural context, our experience of reality is always conditioned by what came before. To live deliberately, rather than passively inhabiting inherited assumptions, we must examine how these predispositions influence what we perceive, expect, and value. By making sense of the factors that shape our implicit models, we become better equipped to refine that understanding, and with it, the way we engage with the world. All right, that was a lot. That was a long one. But we made it through. Okay, so unpacking this section, we pretty much explored everything that I think that we could talk about in relation to our experience in the moment, specifically in relation to the meaning that we experience. If I missed anything, please leave a comment and let me know. I am open to changing anything about this. I do want to make this maybe a little more streamlined, perhaps reduce the amount of complexity and vocabulary that we leverage, as it's not crucially important to understand the type of story we're trying to tell. It just kind of provides more comprehensive explanation and description. So we looked at how experience intuitively feels, and then we looked at the science that makes sense of those intuitive feelings. And by the end of that, we connected those together. So yeah, the main idea is we can think about meaning as not just an idea we have about the world. It arises through our visceral, emotional, and embodied experience. And then there are these key interpretations of homeostasis and predictive processing, which make sense of our entire evolutionary trajectory, as well as our behavior and our biology, and why we experience the things that we do. So we will use them recurrently throughout the rest of this document and these videos. The next video will be the shaping of experience. So we start looking at how our experience of meaning or our understanding changes over time. So that will be the next video. But yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that this wasn't too crazy, and have a good rest of the day.